Yeah. Okay. Screen share. Okay, here we go. Well, hi everybody. Like Emily just said, we're Anissa and Tami. We work for Edmond Public Schools, and we're excited to kind of speak to educators that are just as passionate as we are about navigating all of this in Oklahoma. So,
I don't know about everybody else, but this is us yesterday and for the next 2 months and the last 2 months. And so Anissa and I want to just let you know we're excited to share what we have experienced, what our teachers have experienced, and what we know, but we don't have all the answers, and don't judge our slides. Because we did in true teacher fashion, we're like, here's all these exciting things we have to share, and then we didn't have as much time as we thought to make them quite as beautiful as we thought. So yeah, we're just excited to be here with you, but hopefully we're not going to leave feeling like this about remote learning.
So our mission today, we thought this was a really powerful quote from the World Economic Forum. They really feel like this is the time that we have to kind of grab back education and kind of evaluate how we do things. We all know about technology initiatives and all kinds of things that we've been working towards already, but this is really a relevant time, and it's put a little bit of fire under us to really be in charge and have this catalyst. And so they really foresee this as kind of tackling that old structure and seeing what we want to keep and what we want to change and innovate in. So with that, our target today is really simple. We want to know best practice, design with intention, and connect with people, and just kind of have that here today.
We thought language might be a barrier sometimes when we go to any new system. So asynchronous and synchronous, our experience has been that when you know what they mean, you just use them. And when you don't, at least for me, I felt like I was awkwardly outside of the inner circle. So asynchronous just means that things are not happening at the same time. So your kids might be able to respond in a discussion thread, but they don't have to do that from 9 to 9:30. Anissa can reply on Monday and I can reply on Friday. So that self-paced concept, asynchronous, whereas synchronous is we're all logging in at the same time. We're all going to be present at the same time, even if we're virtual. Online, blended, and face-to-face. When you get these slides emailed to you later, anything that's underlined is a hyperlink. So Quality Matters is a guru that you'll want to know, and their page that defines these three is really clear. But online is just like what it sounds like. Most instruction is delivered from a device, and it is often virtual, so you're far away. Face-to-face is what it sounds like. And then blended in the education world is used really diversely depending on your district, higher ed versus K-12, and even just school to school. So Quality Matters defines blended as some of the learning and instruction is happening digitally and some is happening face-to-face. An LMS, a learning management system, is a place where you can organize content, share it, students can submit back to you, and it can be pretty robust. So Google Classroom is a light LMS. Canvas, Moodle, Blackboard, those are more robust LMS. They're usually come at a cost. And then an ITS is an individual tutoring system, and that would be things like iExcel or Imagine Learning, even potentially Khan Academy, things that can give you reports on student progress and how they're mastering, and they give students that immediate feedback on what they did well or missed.
So just to kind of dive us right in, these are just practical tips that are good for everything we talk about today. So we just kind of wanted to like rapid fire a little bit through those to kind of get us all on that same, like these same practical tips, no matter what we do in the next coming months.
And let's be real, like the research is going to be good, the design is going to be good, but everybody's like, what can I do? Just tell me what I can do. So yep. We thought we'd start there.
What tips? So we want to suggest that this is really important. You find your marigolds. Again, that's hyperlinked, like Tami said, it's underlined, and it links to a blog post from the Cult of Pedagogy, which is another great blog. And she has a fantastic blog post on finding your marigolds. So if you're not familiar, marigolds really fertilize the flowers around them. So they, you'll see there's some walnuts in the corner. Walnut trees tend to like poison the trees around them and the plants around them. We just need to find our marigolds. We're all going to be in this together, and we just need to make sure that we're helping each other and, being uplifting and making sure that we are, I don't know, you just find your team, you find your marigolds. So
remember too, with marigolds, your district PLC, your school-wide PLC, it's really easy to be an island because you are independent and you're in a community. Build content with your community. So another quick tip, take one-take selfie videos. They matter for your kids. It's how they feel like they're connecting with you when you're not with them, and you will for sure look better than Gollum. So if you embrace this concept of like, I'm not even going to watch it back, it's going to be awkward, and I'm going to be like, wow, dog, why are you slobbering on me? And I'm going to leave that in the video. Then you're real to kids. You're not going to waste 3 hours trying to make a perfect announcements for the week video. Just take your one-take selfie.
And so with that, don't be afraid of video chatting with your small groups. So, we constantly think, oh, well, we have to Zoom with the whole class, synchronous, and have everyone there. Feel free to break that up. Have your breakout rooms, or have just a team of 5 kids here and 5 kids here. And that could just help with, just making sure they feel like they can speak up more. There's less likely to be noise and internet connectivity issues. You just have those smaller groups.
Visuals beat text. And if you don't watch The Office, then this GIF won't resonate with you. But brain research tells us, one of my favorite books is Brain Rules. And one of those brain rules is visuals trump text, visuals beat text. When you're making slides, when you're narrating a training for kids, any kind of instruction, even if it's face-to-face, when you fill those slides with text, they could just read them. They don't need you to read out loud to them. And our brains remember images better than they do text. So the rule is you use large, clear images. And when you need to put text, it's large and it's near the image.
So just remembering self-compassion, grace, being flexible. My favorite quote is, those that are flexible don't get bent out of shape. So you just are flexible and going with it, like just have that self-compassion as well. We're really good at having compassion for our students, but just make sure that you are also giving that to yourself as well.
Keep it simple. The tip itself might not be that profound for us, but as you're building something for remote learning, potentially building your whole class online all of a sudden, look for things that you can reuse, templates that every week you can keep reiterating in that same template. A rubric that's really quality, that tells your kids what you're looking for, and you can keep coming back and giving feedback based on that rubric. And even with tech tools, find a few that are versatile, that you can be comfortable with, and you can grow, but start by keeping it simple. That Google Slides link goes to a slide presentation we do at a conference called Google Slides Can Be Used to Make That. And it's tons of tips and tricks, because I think that is my all-time most versatile tool to use for more than just presentations.
That is a great presentation. You should definitely check out. And then use discussions wisely. So I will speak to personal experience. When we went to distance learning, I myself I'm a student, like Emily said, and a lot of the initial, which I understand, was we just created discussion boards. Like, oh, okay, well, we can't meet in class, so let's just have discussion boards. And we want to make sure that we don't allow for kids to just get, you can write a couple sentences and make it sound like you're an expert in anything. And so we want to make sure that those discussions are used well, and that, they are, they're structured into the lesson in a way that makes sense, and they don't have kids become numb to them, where they just see, oh, it's another discussion. And so we can have more like built out tips on that later, but just really using the discussion wisely and not just throwing them out there into the LMS to answer. Okay, so we wanted to dive a little bit into just the research. And so what you're about to see is a lot of just what research says is good practice in terms of online learning. So we're gonna, like we said, we jam-packed a lot in here for you. And so these slides will be shared later, and you can dive into anything as needed. So Screen time is number one, where everyone, that's where my head went when I was like, how are we going to do this? Is screen time even okay for our kids? Things like that. So if they're 2 to 5, they actually only recommend 1 hour. So this only matters if you're pre-K or K, 1 hour of high quality programs. So assigning a YouTube video, things like that. But it's definitely important that they have adult interaction. So unless you can watch a video and give a voiceover, or have questions that you want the parents at home to ask if this was a virtual model, that's really important for those 2 to 5-year-olds. 6 and older, there's actually no specific time. As long as it's not interfering with sleep, physical activity, other healthy things. The American Academy of Pediatrics really doesn't have a specific time. But the AAP actually came out recently and said, hey, those were our rules pre-quarantine. There's some flexibility here because having some of that like breaking up of the day, but just making sure it doesn't affect, you know, we all know kind of that sweet spot. Don't throw video after them at our students. This does not in any way include social interactions on screen time. And the AAP is very explicit on that. That was actually my concern, was, oh my gosh, we're gonna have Zooms with these kids and we're gonna be sending out YouTube videos, but that social interaction is not included in what they say into screen time. There might be physical eye, and I experience Zoom fatigue a lot. I know all of us have probably experienced that recently, but those social interactions, it's physical eye fatigue, not necessarily like a brain development or anything like that fatigue. And I hope that makes sense. Yeah, please.
With screen time, when we do trainings with our teachers, we often use the phrases, think about whether the screen time is consuming, creating, or connecting. So 3 C's, but consuming is that 1 hour for littles. Creating is those projects they're making on those apps on iPads and they're building something, and then connecting are those virtual meetings. So look at those through slightly different lenses. They aren't all the same.
Okay, and just what, again, kind of into what she was just saying, 7 hours traditional, like what we do in a day is 7 hours long typically. We can't just throw that online and expect 7 hours of online work. So I think those 3 categories would actually be really, really helpful in knowing how much screen time you're doing and how much you interact. So this is just the hard, obvious truth, is between face-to-face and online learning and transitioning, there is a huge dip. This is actually pre-pandemic. This was a study done in 2018, and it's just going to happen. And so trying to tackle where maybe they're slipping in this time as we're all figuring it out together is going to be really huge with all of this. The other just hard truth is we just have to accept, and I know all of us have experienced this at some point recently probably, there is a significant, even more dip for those vulnerable or struggling students. So trying to make sure that we're giving them a little extra support, and that's what that research tells me, is just making sure more individually that their needs are being met in this time as we navigate it is going to be very important. So you want to think of your LMS, that learning management system that Tami explained, as an actual classroom. This is not a place to just post things. So if we go virtual, we need to make sure that we're asking, what is something that they had for lunch today? And you want to make sure that you're having interactions as well as like what you would do in your normal classroom, you're just doing it online. And so like those selfie videos that she talked about, those one-take selfies and having interactions and using your LMS as a classroom is going to be very important. Yep. I didn't know if you had something you wanted to add to that.
No, I'm trying to get this out of your way.
Oh.
In case it's on the screen.
You are the best. Okay, so the culture of the online classroom, kind of like elaborating more, is just to list your expectations and model the behavior yourself. And I think that this comes back to that self-compassion where we, like in this last couple months of distance learning, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm just gonna post everything and then I'll just respond to what the kids say. Modeling the behavior and, you know, responding. If you do post an online discussion, go and respond to it yourself. And having those kinds of just modeling the behavior you want to see, just like we would, you know, walking down the hallway in the classroom or, you know, things like that, or in the school, not in your classroom, because you don't have a hallway in your classroom. Providing technical support information, sharing non-academic things as much as academic, and allowing for the students to interact. I know this is a tricky one, especially as we get a little older and even younger, not knowing how to, but if you can, allowing those opportunities so they do feel plugged in will help a lot with the social, emotional needs that we need to meet right now.
Oh, I messed it up by trying to help.
So the lesson basic, like the basic research, just in best practice for online, is you want to mix that asynchronous with the synchronous. So you want to have some things that they can self-pace and do online, but you want to have that check-in with them, like the small group Zooms or the whole group Zooms, if that's what you need to do. You want to have a mix. You want to film things, like, and the easiest example was a science phenomena to help with equal access. So you don't want to assume that they have, I don't know what a good example is off the top of my head, but mixed baking soda and vinegar before. You don't want to assume that they've done that. If your lesson involves that, then you can do that, film that, and send it out, because that helps with equity. You want to use as few tech tools as possible, like we were talking about tech tools. You want to introduce those little by little. So you don't want to throw Google Classroom, Zoom, all of those tools at once. You want to introduce one or two and then add slowly. And asynchronous online courses are notorious for low completion rates. Not just, I mean, they'll all log in, which we just saw with distance learning. They will all log in day one. They want to see what you're doing. They're curious, but then they tend to trail off. So that's where that synchronous check back in really matters.
Right. So I want to share just some, when you're designing the content, some tips and best practices. And a couple of rookie mistakes are, we just get going, we're really excited, and therefore we get this technology tool and we build everything because of the way the technology tool looks. Or we say, this is how we do it in my classroom, so I have to mirror that online. And then we run into trees, because those are not actually best practice. They're just, we've started running before we've thought things through. So my first tip for you in this designing learning is really embrace some reflection as the educator. Why do I do this thing in my classroom? And what would that look like online? Is it still effective online? Is there a better way to do that? Is there someone else I can connect with? Is there an alternative approach to this? But really start to question the things that you do. And not that they're bad in your classroom, but that they may not work perfectly in a different situation. The formula to design good online learning is this simple. It's backwards design and empathy. And that backwards design is knowing your standards and what you're trying to accomplish for your kids and identifying that really clearly. And then the empathy piece is knowing they may be, if you're secondary, they're taking jobs if they get to be virtual and they want self-paced. If they're in a family that doesn't have internet or only has one device and they're having to share that with their siblings, there's just lots to be aware of with where your kids are coming from. So think about cognitive science and best practice. Anissa just gave us a lot of research that we can know. And there's tons out there on learning science and how our brains work, how we remember things. So if you're in the know about that research, what we would recommend, what we're doing here in Edmond, is we're starting with a 3-column approach for planning with our teacher teams. And we're saying, before you think about blended and virtual, let's just identify best practice for your grade level, for your content area. So if you teach early childhood literacy, in general, what does that need to have in it for it to be good? Well, you need to be able to hear the kiddos reading, and they need to be able to listen to you and all the components. In math, they need some direct instruction on this piece, but then they also need to hear how their peers think about problems so they get different perspectives. They have to be able to articulate it. And so they worked through that first column. Our teacher team said, here's what best practice is always. Then you can shift to, okay, if we're in a blended situation and we only see kids every other day because we have to be social distanced, what works? Look at each of your components and build off of that. What stays in class because it needs to stay a collaborative discussion? What works really well is an independent video that they can play 5 times and take notes and bring their questions back. You can start to look at that flipped concept. And then they did the same thing for the virtual column. They said, here's best practice. How do we do that virtually? So it wasn't how many Zoom calls do we need to have, it was, well, they're going to need a touch point there where they can ask questions. That could look like a live video chat with small groups. So that's that 3-column approach. Another part of empathy is knowing your learners and just knowing that basic developmental psychology. Middle school kids are social. They're going to want to get on the Zoom and be ridiculously silly. And I'm allowed to say that because I taught 8th grade and they're the best. But knowing that about your kids, you're going to need more group projects, more opportunities for them to not be islands when they're remotely learning, when they need that at their developmental stage. As another example of their developmental psychology, we know that our littles need less screen time. So just because you're remote or virtual does not have to mean that everything they do is online. Having paper packets, having things they're reading, having things they're drawing with chalk on the driveway. We know how impactful play is for the development of kids. So when you give directions for what they're doing remotely, do not make the mistake that what the kid is doing has to stay on the computer just because you delivered the instructions on the computer. Along with that, knowing your kids and their videos, it is really easy to say, I'm going to make an instructional video. I normally do 15 minutes of direct instruction, so I'm going to record myself doing 15 minutes of direct instruction. But in class, my kids can raise their hand and they can ask a question, and I can tell a joke to let everybody's brain reset, because it needs that after about 10 minutes. Our brains need a shift, or we just don't retain things anymore. So really loose, simple rule of thumb is aim for videos that are less than 3 to 5 minutes. And if you're going for longer content, max out at their age number. If they're 13, the videos are never longer than 13 minutes. And you definitely need breaks built in where you use a tool like Edpuzzle and you can add a question at 2 minutes and they have to answer that question before they can keep watching. Or you add a pause and you say, go take notes on paper first before you click play again. But use videos really intentionally, because the empathy for knowing your kids is that they are not going to sit and watch a 15-minute video of you giving direct instruction. They won't.
Because then they have to do that for every subject area too, if they're, especially secondary.
Right. And I mean, I know you all on this call are engaging and are like TED Talk worthy speakers or as good as Disney Channel and HGTV, but our kids are going to be having that bar of watching their YouTubers, and so they're definitely not going to watch all their teachers unless we are really intentional about how we do those videos. So flipped classroom is probably a phrase you've heard often with designing learning for online, for remote. It's really the concept that if I'm presenting information, I could format that in a way that you can do it at home. And that way, when you're in class with me in that blended model, what you bring are your collaboration, your questions, your discussions. The face-to-face components are very intentional, and what I send home is really intentional, and those videos often come into play when you're flipping. Another piece of being empathetic for your kids is universal design for learning. So if you're not familiar with this, at its most basic level, it literally means kids should not be singled out for having disabilities or needs different from their peers. We should design our learning for kids so that what's good for one kid is really going to meet the needs of many kids. We often know this with our EL strategies. When we have English learners, they need lots of visuals. They need consistent vocabulary. Every kid needs that. So that strategy works across the board. But when you're looking at ADA compliance, Americans with Disabilities Act, there's just some basic tips you can incorporate, and it will be good even if you don't have a hearing or visually impaired kiddo in your class. This is good for every kid. So things like highlighting the words and hyperlinking them to go out to that website instead of having a long URL actually showing on your page. Because if you have a student with a screen reader, it's going to say https : and then it's going to read to them for 2 minutes just to get to that URL. So that's a simple tip, but use hyperlinking. Have high contrast in your font colors and their backgrounds. And this is often hard for teachers who love color because they want to have the hot pink background with the light pink text. And while it looks super fun to Miss Anissa, it is a difficult thing for kids to read who have some visual impairments. And it isn't just low vision. Sometimes they have color blindness. There's lots of different things that you will potentially not ever know your kids have. and having high contrast, like white on black, black on white, just dark and light in your texture backgrounds will make a big difference. We'll leave the rest of these tips here for you, adding alt text to images as a screen reader, using audio when your kids need something read aloud. But the last really big one is closed captioning. Don't pick videos that you give to students unless they have the option for a CC button, or at worst case, a transcript. So like Discovery Education, almost all of their videos, if you use that platform, they have a transcript that you could give to kids, and they can do a lot with that. They can take notes, they can highlight, they could translate it into another language, but it would help your students who need to be able to read and not just hear that video. Okay, when you're differentiating, it doesn't have to be that you have small groups with all your different kiddos at different needs. One of the really cool things about remote learning is that when you offer asynchronous flexibility during the week, you just gave them some differentiation and some choice. When you have a video that they can pause and play and repause and replay until they get it, you've differentiated for your kids. So a lot of what you will build for your remote learning will automatically be differentiated, but we would like to share the word choice is underlined because it takes you to resources we love on how you can build choice into your content, menus, choice boards, and just lists of options for kids. For example, if they need to demonstrate that they know the vocabulary, you could give them the same vocabulary choice board every week, and they get to pick, am I going to put those words in my creative writing project? Am I going to create a Freyer model? Am I going to create a cartoon where my characters are using that vocabulary word in context? But you can keep using that exact same menu or choice list every time, and it will let them differentiate what they're trying to, what they're drawn toward to demonstrate their learning. Anissa, anything else you'd say on choice?
No, I've seen it be very impactful for sure.
And it works in your regular classroom too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so another awesome blessing when you get to design for online, for remote, is that you increase student ownership just by giving them that asynchronous flexibility, but you need to give them a way to track their progress. Because K-12, I mean, even in college, when you're looking at when is this due and what do I have to do to get there and your time management. So we have a couple templates. The one that is on screen now is a draft that Edmond is working on, where teachers would basically say for a week of remote learning, here are the student-centered goals we're working toward. They're founded on the standards. And then they would be able to say, this is going to take about this long for Algebra 1 for the week, or this is the math lesson for today for second grade. It's going to take about 30 minutes in total. And then they would just very simply list out the activities, but leave a column at the side for students to check off when things had been complete. I've read those chapters of The Great Gatsby. I finished my dialectic journal. And they would be able to see, do they need to turn that into the LMS? Or is it just hold it on paper? We're going to talk about it in our small group Zoom. So having some kind of simple at a glance self-tracking sheet for kids.
And I would love to add real quick to that. If you have students that have siblings, this could be really helpful. So if you, again, empathy for the parent or guardian, if I have a K, a 5, a middle schooler, and a high schooler, this could be very helpful, either the student doing it or the teacher helping to provide it.
And we saw some parents printed things like this during our fourth quarter, but many of us, our students just made copies of this Google Doc, and they could put a little X, just type the letter X in their checklist, but their parent could still come and say, hey, show me your progress, how are you doing? We used on our quarter 4 a fillable template for students. So we weren't to the point where we could ask teachers to do that, but we said, kids can make their own. They can track, when am I done with math this week? When am I done with English this week? So this whole image is hyperlinked to a template that you are more than welcome to copy and use. It's just meant to be a resource for our kids to take ownership of their pacing of their learning. Okay, we get a lot of questions about copyright tips from teachers when they're designing their own content. So couple quick things. Just because we're teachers and educators does not mean we are exempt from all the rules of copyright. There are companies that make special terms of use for education and nonprofit, but you have to look for that. We can't just assume that it's there. The main thing I think about is if I'm using someone else's stuff, I need to make sure they have credit and the internet traffic. So it's not enough for me to make my copy by taking a picture of it that I wasn't allowed to do and then saying, Anissa Angier-Dunn made this photo. I still stole her stuff. She doesn't get the internet traffic to know people were coming to look at what I had built. So the best practice is you send kids to the original source, or you reach out and you ask the owner if you can use that in your classroom, and you document that you got that permission. Think about with images, you can use any Google file if you're a G Suite district. Anytime you're inside of a Google Slides or a Google Doc, if you use insert image inside of that Google file, then Google will only give you image results that you're allowed to use that aren't copyrighted. So it's a quick way. There are other ways to get images that are free to use. Unsplash, Pixabay, and Photos for Class are 3 websites that are really easy to grab free to use video images as well. And then with videos, you cannot have a YouTube video playing on your screen and record your screen while you're telling your kids about that video, because now you just took someone else's content and made it your own, and they're not going to get the traffic on their YouTube video to know whether it was a good video to make.
And the views are everything on
Yes,
YouTube.
right?
So, I mean,
that's how they're making their money on their advertisement. Then the last copyright tip that I would just, it's one of those where teachers, we think we're sharing, we're collaborating, but if you've purchased something off of a site like Teachers Pay Teachers, you purchased that for your class, you did not purchase that for your school or for your district. So it is a violation of copyright unless the terms of use on that particular part of Teacher Pay Teacher told you could. And it's not okay to put that in a shared folder so your whole 4th grade team can use that Teacher Pay Teacher greatness. Every 4th grade teacher should be purchasing it if you're going to go that route for your curriculum, because somebody made that and they deserve the credit and the financial support for what their efforts were.
we say this knowing how hard that is,
It's
but
so
yes.
difficult. But ultimately it's about honoring the people who made that content, because they are putting time and energy and effort and research hopefully into what they're building, and we would want that same respect back if we had done the same. And so those are basic copyright tips. Now for students, when you're in that, oh my gosh, we just went online and now they're going to cheat on everything. We hear that a lot too. So when you're designing online learning, a couple tips to avoid plagiarism with kids: teach them the difference between collaborating and cheating. We sometimes think as teachers we shouldn't have to tell them, they should know that by now, but they often don't. You can use digital tools like Turnitin, or I know Google Classroom has a new accountability checker. Not played with it yet, but there are some ways that you can have platforms do the plagiarism check for you. And then this is a really dumb but awesomely simple teacher tip. So if I ever suspected that Anissa had just copied that essay, I would find 2 or 3 sentences in her essay and I would copy them, and I would go to google.com and I would put quotations around the part of her essay that I thought looked suspicious. And when you put quotations, Google is looking for that exact order of like that exact phrase. So if I've copied 3 sentences and I put quotes around them and I search for it, if it yields no results, then I know those are Anissa's words. They're not out on the internet. If I get like the Harvard Business Review has that exact same 3 sentences in that exact order, and I have to have a conversation with Anissa, my student. So it's time consuming. You wouldn't do that all the time, but when you're concerned, you see a giant red flag, that's a really easy way to check. The best way to avoid plagiarism is to make better assignments. And I understand that that takes time, so I don't say this lightly, but if your students are able to interject their own creativity, their own lens into what they're turning in, they often can't go copy somebody else. They can't just get someone else's Google Doc, because it will be really obvious that it was the same. So finding ways where students can demonstrate their learning and be individual and creative is a good way to avoid plagiarism. Okay, Anissa, do you want to talk a little bit about online discussions? I know these are, and when we say discussions, we mean like threads of post, not video chats.
Sure, I think she knows this is a passion topic of mine. But you want to make sure that there's a purpose, kind of like what we alluded to earlier, the clear expectations, and all of that should be set up, I think, from the very, very beginning, of course. But I mentioned modeling. So you just want to make sure that like when my student Tami posts, I respond with a thoughtful question, and to make her keep talking. And so then maybe students will start asking questions themselves of their peers when they see things. I would suggest sentence stems. So kind of going back to those expectations. So even those like disagreement sentence stems are actually probably the most important. So giving those students the words of like, can you tell me more about that? Because I'm not seeing the same thing. And having those, like you're teaching them those soft skills or success skills or whatever we're calling them now, you're teaching them those at the same time. The font style system was something I saw recommended, but I don't have experience with that, but I see it could be beneficial. So you have a bold means it's a word in, I don't know, it's a word in our curriculum and I used it, so I'm gonna bold it. Or underlining when I don't know, like underlines maybe are just for hyperlinks, things like that, having a normed system like that so that the students are communicating that way as well. And incorporating video and audio posts if possible, letting them hear voices and see the faces of their classmates. And your face and voice is very important in there if you can. Bring them to life a little bit.
It is a rookie mistake we see even at higher ed. We think we have really good discussions face to face, and now we've gone remote, we've gone virtual, we've gone online. We're going to use the discussions in our learning management system to replicate what we would have done in class, and they are not the same. They're simply not the same. So don't just think because it says discussion in your learning management system that means it needs to be a roundtable discussion. There's lots of ways that you can creatively use conversation threads, but you have to design them very strategically to make them work.
And breaking them out into small online groups to discuss as well, into like groups of 5. I probably should have made that a bullet point, but not feeling like you have to have all 25 kids on the same discussion thread. You feel free to break that out to 5, 6, and then you'll hear more from those 5 or 6.
We also see peer-led discussions. So the topic for the week, the teacher can still guide, but you have nominated a kid in every small group who's going to be the discussion leader, and their job is to keep people engaged, ask good questions, and do some extra research and post it, whatever the parameters are that you set up. So those kids who might start to disengage from the discussion have a peer in addition to their teacher, keeping that conversation flowing. Okay, and my last one for designing online learning is keeping the clarity for your kids. And that is in the navigation of where to go. It's using visual cues, like maybe every time they need to do something on paper, you have a picture of a pencil or a picture of a piece of paper, but they have something visual back to those image, beat, text, brain rules. They have something that says, that's what this means, I'm gonna go do that. That's the quiz icon. That's the discussion icon. You also, rubrics, give them clear expectations. What are you grading me on when I turn in that essay? What are you looking for when I do that assignment? Even if you just have 3 things and that's how you're going to score it, they should know what those are ahead of time. And I'll leave you with the LMS. Picture the first day of school, specifically when you go to a big high school or you're off to university. Your first day trying to find your class, and you are holding your map of the entire campus and the 2-story buildings and the F227 and the E17 and the -100, what the heck is that? And you're trying to find stuff. You don't just magically show up at the right building, at the right class. You have to spend a lot of time looking at that map, wandering the campus, asking where's that building. It's the same way in an online system for students. So that first week, even if you have a video where you're talking on screen and you're saying, hey guys, remember this part in the stream, this is going to be used for that way, but you always do this first, go here. Somehow being a guide for them and acknowledging the amount of time that it takes for them to learn how to get where they need to go at the beginning is really important. And then the way you've structured it for the whole semester or the whole school year needs to be clear. Use modules, use topics, use whatever the chunking categories are in your learning management system. You should be able to tell kids, go to week 1 and find the assignment. They shouldn't have to dig to figure out where the stuff is every time they need to find it. So being really strategic. And if that's not your strength, again, find your marigolds. Say, hey, who on my team or at my school is the hyper-organized system creator? Show me how you did yours. Will you look at mine as if you're a kid and tell me all the things you wish were different? Because if you set it up right, it will make a world of difference for your kids.
I love that analogy of the map.
I stole it from a book we're about to recommend. So don't think that I'm awesome. It came from the book.
Okay, so we want to make sure that we also touch on a huge piece. We know lessons are important, but this will support that. So just as quickly as I can, keeping an eye on the time. Okay, yeah. So we've got, we wanted to just, this was another research piece, but it still belonged over here. Perceived, even perceived, social presence is engaged and satisfied learners. So if I go in, and I don't know if your LMS would allow this, even if it's, you know, you're on a paper distance learning in calling and just saying, hey, having even just perceived social presence or liking a post or whatever, you're gonna have, it's gonna pay off for you. And I repeat it again, without synchronous and check-ins like that, those asynchronous learners kind of drop off. They don't complete. It's also important because we have to Maslow before we bloom. And I mean, I've heard it before. I can't take credit for that either, but it's, I think, even more important now in a time of very different social, emotional resources and things like that being provided, and it's such a different time. It's a jarring time, so we have to meet the Maslow before we bloom.
Just in case we have someone watching on YouTube who's like new to education, fill them in on what you mean by that.
So sorry, the Maslow's hierarchy, thank you for that. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so making sure that they are taken care of, making sure that they have a roof over their head, and Maslow is obviously the basic of basics, but basic check-ins and human interaction, because Bloom is Bloom's taxonomy, so it's just the lessons and how we design them and higher order thinking and all of that. I'm not there unless my Maslow needs are taken care of. So I'm not going to learn or retain anything you tell me unless I am fed, I have a roof over my head, I feel safe. None of that, that all has to be in place. So thank you for that. Okay, so generally speaking, we just, I'm putting our shoes on for the parents. Parents, again, back to those multi-children homes, they already have personal and work emails they're getting, and now they're getting even more from you and potentially their student if they're old enough. So we want to make sure that parents and guardians, you need to get to the point and bullet lists and all of that, take out extraneous text. And there's a hyperlinked survey in here that it's basically just a survey asking how they're doing. Just how are the parents doing? Hey, are you good with the way I'm communicating with you? And getting that feedback is really important. So you want to communicate as a team. So if you are and this is, I think, going to be even harder in secondary, but it can be done. If you can if you teach ELA and getting with your math person and getting with your science person and communicate as a team, you are going to keep those parents and guardians and families engaged. Bonus points if you make them a checklist, because that is really what they need right now. If they are in any way supposed to help facilitate any learning at home, they are not classically trained in education, and so they need it broken down for them. Consider sharing your experiences. Consider sharing, and we know that's hard to kind of open up sometimes, and you don't want it to be a negative thing, but just showing that you're struggling too, or showing that you are doing what you can to adapt, and oh, thank you for that suggestion, I will incorporate that. Having those like more vulnerable, like, hey, I don't know everything either, and having that kind of rapport with parents, families, students is really going to be in your benefit. So if you do have students that are maybe like they don't have access to one-to-one technology or internet, you can tailor your check-ins. So you do not have to have a Zoom call with all of them logged in at the same time. You have the flexibility to decide on a phone call, on a quick email, or a written letter. You have that flexibility. Don't feel like, oh, I can't Zoom with my kids, therefore I'm I'm not doing what I need to be doing. During the check-in, feel like you can teach, of course, and answer questions, but we're going to keep stressing the care, listening, and support, so as well as academics. So you want to have both. To build on the slow, no internet, consider also texting. I know that scares some people, but GroupMe, YoTeach, and other like anonymous texting apps could be really helpful in that as well. It clones your number. Google, oh gosh, I didn't even think to put that one in there. There's a Google app, and we'll incorporate that and send that out. That clones your number as well. So if you are a G Suite district, is it Google Voice? Maybe.
I don't know. I have Remind on my mind.
I should remember that. Remind is also another good one, things like that. And then those asynchronous check-ins such as Flipgrid. So if we kind of mentioned this earlier too, but Flipgrid, if you're not familiar, can record you talking and post it up there. And then when I log in, I can go see Tami's video and then record my own. So that still makes me feel like, oh, I saw my classmate Tami. Oh, I saw my teacher. But I didn't see them in live time, is still just as good. Okay, so on those video check-ins, you want to make sure that the appropriate settings are on, such as they can't just share the screen if they want to. You want to make sure that you're in control, and that's with any of them. I mentioned Zoom specifically here on the Zoom backgrounds and things like that. You also want to make sure that your students, that you know that they're coming from different places as well. You want to make sure that your background is neutral. If I don't know how to put you just don't want you don't want anything in the background distracting them, and you also just want to be aware that you are cognizant of maybe some students that are not able to be in their own home Zooming you. You want to make sure it's a neutral background and that there's nothing, I don't know how to put that, but just making sure that your background is neutral for your students as well and not as a distracting thing. We kind of talked about having some small groups, so do I need all students for this? Is this like an announcement check-in, video check-in, or is this like a teaching one that needs to be small group? So make sure you're asking yourself that. And when is the best time? I would 1000% survey and then set it in stone with the option of like maybe at the quarter after 9 weeks, then we'll do another survey and see, okay, did that time end up working? Do we need to adjust? But surveying and then setting it in stone for a period of time so that there's no like, oh, I scheduled a doctor's appointment that time, because they always know at this time we're checking in. If you are doing a video check-in, letting them join by phone, being mindful of your learners, record it if it's worth it. So if it's something that you are teaching, or maybe it is an announcement, you are always going to have absent students in person or virtual. Feel free to record it. If your students, what we hear a lot is they're not checking in, they're not even calling in, they're not doing that. Just remember, it takes 66 days to develop a habit, which I know that's a slight thing, but we're all adjusting our lives right now, and there was a lot going on. So don't let that discourage you, but you do want to check in. Hey, what's holding you back? Things like that. And I said use FOMO. This was something I saw recommended. I have a crazy FOMO. This would totally work on me. But FOMO stands for fear of missing out. So when oh, hey guys, more than ever, we had everyone turn in their math assignment on time. Like, shout out to those people that turned it in. We had 2 more than last week turn theirs in on time, or having that kind of like, I know that's positive reinforcement, but I don't know, or if you do have video check-ins or things like that, just being like, oh, that really funny thing that we talked about on this day, just having that kind of like FOMO.
Create a
FOMO. That's it. Create a FOMO. And again, I said survey your families. Feel free to ask them if what you're doing works.
Okay, so I think we have about 6 or 7 minutes left. And so rather than tell you all of our favorite resources, you're going to get this slide deck. I'm just going to say our favorite tech tools are here. Quality Matters has an online instructional rubric. Ditch That Textbook has amazing resources for designing digital learning. Tons of STEM resources.
Yes.
Computer science, sorry.
I think that too. And they also have some e-learning on there too. But don't be like, sorry, why? Like if you go and you're like, oh, this is all computer science, there's other stuff on there too. So. Oh, yes. And I think I even saw Karen is on the call, but our director of ed tech and computer science for the State Department, that whole department has put together a fantastic resource list for you. And so we wanted to give them a shout out. There's a lot on there for actual tech tools.
And then just a couple websites and Twitter hashtags you might want to follow. Knowing that these are here, you can come back to them, and there's even some more things we would recommend you Google, other resources that are here. So you'll get the slides, book recommendations, but we asked Emily if she'd keep her eye on the chat, and I know the chat popped up a couple times as a flash for us. But Emily, were there any major questions you think we might have time to do one or two Q&A?
No major questions in the chat, just a lot of great points. I loved some of the different topics you guys mentioned in the resources. So if you guys have some questions, you are welcome to either just chime in right now, or you're also welcome to put them in the chat box. So I guess I do have one. For Edmond Public Schools, how are you guys, I mean, you had that 3-tier spreadsheet for best practices. Is that kind of what you're gonna recommend for teachers to going forward into the fall, since none of us really know what it's going to look like? Like, what do you think a teacher in the summer trying to think about what's gonna happen this fall, like, where should they start?
So what Edmond is doing is we are building out a lot of resources and professional development, and I can describe those quickly. And then we're encouraging our teachers in June to just learn the research, become knowledgeable about what other people are doing, follow someone new on Twitter, and then just grow themselves, so that when we hit July and there are some potential in-person workshops, or August when everyone will have to be trained on a lot of new tools, that they will be mentally prepared for that. But Edmond is looking at contingency plans, essentially, of we're going to be face-to-face, we're going to be blended like every other day you see kids or something, and we're going to be fully virtual. And that we kind of need to all be ready for any of those at any time, because we weren't ready for COVID. So with that in mind, their pacing guides are going to be updated and adjusted, and we're going to ask every teacher to align and commit to those pacing guides, because now more than ever, we need to be on the same page when we're building resources and sharing things with families. So pacing guide alignment. Our LMS for secondary is setting up some minimum requirements. We've had an LMS for a couple of years, but they're saying for consistency for kids, you have to structure it this way moving forward. We're getting an LMS for our elementary to prepare for that, and they're picking right now between a few different ones. So we're choosing technology tools, and then we've got teachers who have come together, and principals from every area of our district, special ed and gifted and K-12, pre-K-12, and they contributed to those 3 columns, best practice, blended, and virtual. And so now our central office is taking that, and we're going to say, here are the guidelines. Videos shouldn't be more than this long, some of those best practices. Here are the requirements. You have to do this if we go virtual. Minimum, this is non-negotiable. And then here's your content area specific support, which is best practice if I'm blended, if I'm virtual. So we're going to take the information and try to develop some friendlier resources that are usable for our teachers.
And I think starting with the best practice was really, and that was all Tami, was very fun. It was a phenomenal way of shifting our mindset, because I was doing exactly what the rookie mistake we talked about was, which was, okay, well, what tech do we need, and what, and having Tami slow us down and go, nope, start here. What would you have done in a normal math lesson? And then just adapting that and converting that over was a way that made all of us go, oh, okay. And then the lessons will also just be higher quality naturally that way. Yeah.
Great points. We had a couple questions on some content specific resources. So we had a question from Carol about algebra and upper level math, and also from Michelle about health.
I've got people I know who to ask. I know for algebra, I don't know. I would rather ask the experts before we suggested something. But we do have some people in the office that if they have one, we will pass that on. subject specific, I would say we're just starting to dive into. I know that we've thrown around Khan Academy occasionally and things like that for algebra. For health, I know EverFi it's free and it's pretty good. But I would be scared to go too far beyond that without checking it with our experts. But if they pass on anything, we will do the same through you, Emily.
Awesome. You said EverFi?
EverFi, EVERFI.
Thank you.
I know our Algebra 2, all of our math teachers came together in quarter 4 and built content, and some of them did some super creative things. So they did say, go to Khan Academy and master this, go to IXL and do 10 problems on this. They had some of that practice that had automated feedback, but then they creatively made a team video of, here's the project that you're gonna do, and let me tell you this crazy weird scenario, and now you have to solve it, and it was highly engaging, teacher selfie videos, and problem solving project driven for upper level math. So our content specialist, Becky Archibald, could probably either direct you to some examples or show you what they did. She led them, and they really just dove in and did great things.
I mean, the dashboard is still up too, right?
It's true. If you want to see what they built for quarter 4, the URL is tinyurl.com. So Anissa's typing it in the chat. Tinyurl.com is just a way to shorten a website. So, and then you put slash, and it's Edmond, EDMOND, learns. So tinyurl.com/Edmond learns, and you can see what our teachers built for fourth quarter, if that's useful to you. We weren't taking grades. They were teaching new things, but they weren't submitting work and giving grades, so it won't look like that in the fall, but you can see creative approaches to content building.
Yeah, it'll look different in the fall, but it had some math and things like that integrated into it, so we wanted to suggest it.
Wonderful. Thank you, guys. We are right at the 1 o'clock point. So I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time. But would love to give a huge thank you to these two wonderful ladies for taking your time preparing all this wonderful information. And
it's a lot. We're really sorry.
No, you guys are great. I hope everyone who participated got some really cool tips and strategies that they can implement in their classroom. And what we will be doing from this point, we will share out the webinar as soon as the recording uploads. And then you can also find it on our YouTube channel for TRSA and at our TRSA site. And then we'll also share the slide deck that they are using as well in that email to all participants. And then I do want to tell you that next week, this is a weekly webinar series that we are doing. So next week we are taking a little bit different approach, and we actually have a group of really incredible and inspiring high school students who are going to do a panel for us. These are students on our teen advisory group. So they represent 3 different Tulsa area schools, all high school students. And they are going to be giving the student perspective of digital learning and some of the things that they have experienced, like what strategies that they came up across and what worked well for their different learning styles and other classmates they know. But then they also just developed a summer camp for TRSA, which is the first virtual camp that will start on Monday. So we will get to learn how they kind of had to also shift to the other side to be able to plan and prepare curriculum for an online camp. And then it'll be a day 4. So we'll kind of have some lessons learned on how that has been going. So please feel free to join us next week. We'll have the registration link for that webinar in the same email. And then you will also be able to register for it through different advertisements for that webinar. But again, thank you, Tami and Anissa. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. And please be safe and stay healthy.
Thank you.